I just want to welcome you all to this webinar and thank you for joining us. Our topic today is setting the record straight. How can local newsrooms serve democracy? It's a conversation with the team at Open Vallejo. And this is a JSK Fellowship Community Impact event here at Stanford University. I'm excited to be joining you from the Stanford campus in the JSK office. My name is Paulette Brown-Hinds. I am a JSK Senior Fellow, publisher of the Black Voice News in Southern California, and I'm co-founder of Media in Color, which is a philanthropically supported initiative for news organizations serving California's diverse communities. The past 2 years have really shown that American democracy is more fragile than many care to think. But to communities impacted by police violence, corruption, and neglect, our democracy's failures have been evident for much longer. I'm excited to be in conversation today with the team at Open Vallejo, Jeffrey King and Laurence Dussault, as we discuss how one local news organization is supporting democracy by centering people in every aspect of the work, including how to decide which stories to tell, how to tell them in a way that honors deeper truths, and how to create impact that lasts past sensational headlines. Open Vallejo is an award-winning, independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit newsroom serving the public interest in the city of Vallejo, one of America's most diverse cities, and one that has been long burdened by police violence, corruption, and neglect. It is the first project of the Informed California Foundation and is a permanent design laboratory for open source, high impact, broadly accessible frameworks for ensuring local transparency, accountability, and information justice. Now, joining me today is the Open Vallejo team, and I want to start by introducing my friend, Jeffrey King, who's an attorney and journalist with a focus on free expression, open government, press freedom, and privacy. He is the executive editor at Open Vallejo, president and CEO of the Informed California Foundation, and he is a JSK alum. I am proud to say he is a fellow. We were in the same cohort last year. Jeff is a Vallejo native and a graduate of Vallejo Public Schools. He attended Diablo Valley Community College before transferring to the University of California, Berkeley, where he earned his BA with highest distinction. And he also holds a JD from Stanford Law School. From 2013 to 2016, he led the Global Technology Policy and Advocacy Program at the Committee to Protect Journalists, which is an independent nonprofit organization that advocates for press freedom worldwide. Before that, he served as a First Amendment litigator, representing journalists, activists, and artists in free expression and open government matters. Since 2011, Jeff has taught privacy law at UC Berkeley, where he's also taught courses on the intersection of media and social change, as well as media law and First Amendment. And as I mentioned, he served last year as a John S. Knight Community Impact Fellow here at Stanford University, where he's also a non-residential fellow at Stanford Law School's Center for Internet and Society. Jeff, I think you have more titles than I do. Which is probably why we get along so well.
Probably. Thank you very much, Paulette.
Yeah, joining Jeff, we have Laurence Dussault. Laurence is an Open Vallejo senior writer and editor focused on technical publications and investigations. She holds a bachelor's degree from McGill University and a master's degree in journalism from the University of California, Berkeley. She was previously Open Vallejo's investigative reporter and a ProPublica local reporting network fellow. And she was part of the team that won a 2022 Society of Professional Journalists, Northern California Chapter's Excellence in Journalism Award. Before joining Open Vallejo, Laurence was the income inequality reporter at the Mercury News for the California Divide, which is a multi-newsroom project led by Cal Matters, which received the 2021 National Press Foundation Poverty and Inequality Award for its coverage of how COVID-19 impacted vulnerable renters in the state. Laurence also served as a reporter with the investigative reporting program at the University of California, Berkeley, where she and her colleagues won the Society of Professional Journalists Northern California Chapter's 2020 Investigative Reporting Award for California's Criminal Cops, a statewide accountability project. Welcome, Jeff and Laurence.
Thank you, Paulette. It's great to be here.
I want to get started. I just want to say for folks joining us, I'm hoping to get to questions at the end. So if we're talking, you can put questions in the Q&A, and I will try my best to get to them before we close out. We definitely want to respect your time. So let's get started. Let's get started by discussing your approach to covering the city of Vallejo, and especially to police misconduct in a city that has garnered national attention for its rate of police killings, which far outpaces all but two California cities. San Bernardino is one of them, which is my hometown. How did you approach your work, especially as you work to center community voice there in Vallejo? Jeff?
Thank you, Paulette. I think that to answer that question fully, I need to answer also the why we do things the way we do. I started Open Vallejo for the community that I grew up in as a tool to hopefully be useful to them. I did not start out to create a newsroom. I set out to create really just something useful. And I was spending more time here in Vallejo because my dad had passed away and my mom had Alzheimer's, and was just here more and was reminded about how amazing this community is, but also quickly began to observe processes that were opaque to the point of being undemocratic. And so our approach takes its greatest inspiration from Ida B. Wells, who wrote in 1892 that the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. All of our work starts with that premise. And our goal is to publish accurate, high-quality works that create real change, works that will endure. Nearly all of our stories originate from members of the community, whether that means people impacted by police violence, families of those who were killed, government officials, business owners, people who are unsheltered. Often these people were dismissed, repressed, harassed, pushed aside. Many of them went to city officials, state officials, federal officials, spoke up on social media, went to city council meetings, did everything they could to participate in their own sort of purported democracy here. And nobody listened to them. And worse, often they experienced harassment and retaliation. So our goal, because what we're here for is to listen to people's stories and help them tell their stories. In addition, this is really possible because I am from here and I am here. A police officer stared me down at the farmer's market the other day. I run into people, they see me. There's no situation in which I am not accountable for all of our work. And so that means that we have to act with integrity at all times.
I'll follow up that statement. I'm not from Vallejo, and as someone, I'm Canadian, actually, I'm French Canadian. This isn't even my first language. So as someone who, isn't from here, I think that my responsibility to the community is even greater. And that translates into every part of my work. And it's a balancing act, right? Because as a reporter, and especially as a white reporter in a community that's very diverse, the process of interviewing someone is basically asking someone to lend you their knowledge and their story and often their culture. And you're often asking them about some of the most traumatizing events of their life, right? And so it's a balancing act between finding that truth and potentially what could be, if it's not done the right way, an extractive process, a process that can traumatize people. It can re-traumatize people if it's not done the right way. I mean, and even sometimes when it's done the right way, but when people want to do something, even though they know it's going to harm them, that is power to them. And so what we're trying to do is balance and minimize harm while telling the truth, really. And with Open Vallejo, we have some processes that are entrenched in the way that we work that help with that. Like, I mean, and something that we do is just to, before you do anything in your story, before you reach out to anyone in the community, just educate yourself first, right? Spend some time reading books, digging through archives. Before I even started on any story with Open Vallejo, I read several books on the city. I learned about the history of segregation and here, the legacy of World War II and the military presence on Mare Island for so long. And, something else that you can do is just talk to experts first, because it's often their job to have some sort of interaction with reporters, whereas people who are community members, they're not paid to speak with you. And so it's important to start where you can get all the information that you can't get from the community, get them before you even do any outreach. Something else that that is really important, I think, to Jeff and I, to everyone at Open Vallejo, is to let people tell their own stories. And, I didn't come to Vallejo with a set of stories I wanted to tell about police violence. I came here and I thought, let's ask people what they think we should talk about. And so we were working in collaboration with ProPublica at the time, and we organized a call out to the community. We built an online survey that was confidential, and we printed out just hundreds of paper where you could scan a QR code, get to the survey, and answer a confidential survey. And that's just one way of doing that, but giving a chance to anyone to speak up. And once people actually do reach out to you, which they did by, the dozens, we met with each and every one of them, right? We responded to most of these responses, and I met with dozens of people. And, the next step when you do meet with folks is just trust what they're telling you. Trust what they're telling you, believe what they're telling you, then verify, right? Because these people are lending you their time. And it has never happened to me that someone has told me something about, a traumatic event in their life, and I found out that they were lying. And so what we do here is we start with trust, we start with believing that your story is true, and then we do everything we can to verify it. And in this case, that's what led to our story about botched police killing investigations in Vallejo. People I was speaking to kept telling me that they saw their police department as incompetent, really. A lot of them were talking about harassment. Some of them had, proofs, contemporary proofs of it. People who had lost loved ones to police violence were telling me that they felt like they weren't really being taken seriously at all, to the point that they felt like investigators really wanted them to just stop talking about it, to keep their mouth shut. And in many regards, they were right. And so just take a chance on the people who take their time to talk to you, believe them, and then verify what they say. I would say that one more thing that we do that is a bit unconventional compared to traditional journalism is the concept of meaningful consent. And to me, that also implies what I call revocable consent to some extent. People who have been harmed in the past, people who have gone through loads of trauma that I can't even begin to imagine, that is just not in my realm of comprehension as a white person who's from Canada. People who have safety concerns, you're not trapped against your own best interests in our reporting, right? In traditional journalism, often if you say something that's on the record, you can't take it back. But as a reporter, it's a privilege for me to work in a news organization, honestly, that gives me the leeway of saying, actually, this person has safety concerns and I'm scared for their psychological health. And, they should have the option to, pull back from this, because this is not going to be a positive outcome for them. And so we see parts of our reporting as collaborative, right? I keep you appraised of what I'm doing here. You'll know exactly what's happening before it happens. And you still have a say in what's happening really with our journalism. So in my mind, my job always belonged to the community, because the information that I get, it belongs to them. It comes from them. So what I'm doing is I'm putting it in a story form. I'm confirming every single little detail, and I'm just kind of giving it back in a form that's been vetted and confirmed.
I'm really curious, and either one of you can answer this, just about that. When you talk about the trust, right, where you trust them, they have to trust you, right? And I'm curious, like, how long did that process take when you first started? So if you started with, surveying people, already there's a signal there that you want to know what they're thinking, what matters to them. And I'm just curious about, like, how long did that take to build that kind of trust? Or was it, Jeff's from this town, we know him, we trust him. What was that like? Either one of you can answer.
Laurence?
I mean, it really depends on who you're speaking with, right? There are people who have been burned by the media before, who have told information that was wrongly translated into articles. These people who've been harmed, not only by the media, but also by government officials. Some have gone through years and years and years of lawsuits, felt like they were cheated by, the attorneys that they thought were working with them. Those people, they're not going to tell you about, they're not going to show all their cards the first time you met with them, right? And there's no way that they should, really. And so a lot of these relationships take weeks and months to develop, and you need to maintain them, right? You don't speak to someone a couple of times, you get what you want, and then you stop the relationship there. That would be irresponsible. These relationships carry through from the beginning to publication and even after publication, right? Because we need to know that people are safe, and that, what we published and they're having their name out in the public sphere is not interrupting their life in a negative manner. So, but we've also sat down with people who have told us their whole life story on the very first day over an 8-hour interview, because no one had ever asked them about it, right? And so it'll differ, and often I will say it will correlate with, how much has someone been burned before, and how much do they feel like they can trust someone who's not from their community, just on the first time that they meet.
So you're talking too about, like, this time commitment, and I think about the work you do. American Press Institute, a few years ago, published some research on the attributes of effective accountability journalism and journalists. And I think of, some of those characteristics remind me of your work and your process. You work hard to create context for your audience. You smartly balance your time on story choices and audience interactions. You build considerable time with building relationship with sources and with readers. And so there's a lot, I know, that goes into the construction of an Open Vallejo report. Can you kind of walk us through the construction of a specific story, a specific decisions you made, and how much time went into the reporting process?
Absolutely. I think Laurence is probably best situated because her recent story about repeat killings was the biggest and most ambitious story we've ever produced. But if I could say just a sort of introductory remark about the amount of time that this takes. I mean, we're a small newsroom, but the kind of work we do, which is investigative and explanatory journalism, almost always these slow burn investigations, they would take large newsrooms with lots of resources a long time too. It's just the nature of the kinds of stories we do. ProPublica put out they did a research study sometime back and produced a white paper that showed that the decline in local news and in news in general, it was impacting explanatory and investigative journalism the most. The local daily coverage was still happening, But the deeper dives, the long-term work, that's what was suffering the greatest. And so we took inspiration from that. That was the role that they saw themselves in. And we, in this hyperlocal way, also see that as our priority. So there's a lot that we forego that would be very resource intensive. We work on each story for as long as it takes. Often that's months. I think it defies traditional news frameworks in some ways. They rely on algorithms, which themselves often value quantity over quality. But it also defines us that we do this. It's a choice. We place our very limited resources in creating these in-depth reports. And we hope that they'll benefit the community long after the headlines have vanished. And so that sort of quick turnaround cycle is one that we're hoping to break, or at least supplement, because algorithms, for all their complexity, aren't people. We exist to serve people and not algorithms. And so we try to ensure that all of our stories reflect that. And to do that, it requires a lot of care that I think Laurence can speak to very eloquently.
Yeah.
A lot of care. And I think that a lot of what we do on a daily basis isn't necessarily easily discernible in the final product. You know, what you see, the writing and what you see, the visuals, I would say that's probably about less than 5% of what we do, every day. So, I mean, if I had to take a few steps back and take a look at, what the construction of a story looks like, I think that a good example would be that story, Jeff, that you referred to about Vallejo's botched police killing investigations over a decade, which we co-produced with ProPublica. That story found that the department had been mishandling its investigations into fatal incidents. We found ignored eyewitnesses, missing mandatory police reports, botched evidence handling, botched evidence analysis. And we also found that the investigations took so long that in 6 out of 17 cases, you had one officer or more who was involved in a fatal incident who was already being investigated for another fatal incident. And considering that most officers don't fire their weapon, at all during their careers, I mean, when I spoke to experts, that definitely sounded to them as it was an outlier. But figuring out all of that data, that took us just over a year to make these findings. And so here's a little bit of what kind of went into that. First, I mean, as I said in the previous question, we had to do our due diligence, so some preliminary research before even reaching out to anyone. So I spent a lot of time in archives and niche publications at the courthouse. And I was also really lucky because Open Vallejo had already done some of the legwork for me. In August of 2020, Open Vallejo published its critical incident database. And to this day, from what I know, it's still the most comprehensive database that shows Vallejo Police's serious uses of force. It has a lot of information in there, more than I was ever able to find in any other public sphere. And so when you're looking at all that information, when you're doing that preliminary research, what you're looking for are areas of concentrated power, where that power runs the risk of being abused. So whether it be there's a power vacuum because a very powerful city manager just left, or whether it be because there is no oversight system for the police department, both of which are true in Vallejo at the moment. So once you've done that preliminary research, then, I mean, you feel you can responsibly reach out to people who are within the community. And so that's the time to do things like a call out to the community, to let the chance to as many people as you can to hear them out, right? So you build these relationships over time. As you said, you need to maintain them throughout the reporting. But that's a step that you take, generally after doing your preliminary research. So you meet with dozens and dozens and dozens of people.
And you're making this data available too. I saw it's on the website too. So even as you're using it for reporting, people can have access to the data. Okay.
Yes, that's one of the first things that we did was we put it out. And in fact, if I could just interject for a moment and share the story of that, we had been working on this database because there was no comprehensive database that we were aware of, at least not Vallejo specific. There was an event by a local church that had ties to the police department, at least its leadership did, and had ties to the city. And they organized a sort of a funeral procession for people killed by police, a symbolic one. And I don't recall if it was one or two or maybe three people who had been killed by the police in Vallejo on the list of names that they had, but Vallejo has killed dozens of people, and those names weren't listed. And so the sister of a young man named Angel Ramos, who was unarmed, shot at a family gathering by a police officer named Zachary Jacobson, his sister Alicia showed up to this and was live streaming, and I saw the live stream pop up. And at that point, even though the database wasn't quite ready, we just put the names out because we felt it was really important.
And there's a question in the Q&A about data and reliability of data, but I'm going to ask it before I ask my next question, but I want to have Laurence finish. I think there's some good questions popping up in the chat. I want to make sure that we address those.
I'll try to run through these steps quickly because, if I'm honest, there are just so many steps to building these stories that, if I go in depth through each and every one of them, we won't be done by the end of the discussion.
Right, the abbreviated version.
So I'll just try to finish pretty quickly. Once you're establishing these relationships with people, it's time to try to verify the claims that they've said, right? And something that's one of my favorite parts of reporting is when you have a critical mass of people who have spoken with you. Now you're trying to figure out, what are they telling together? Are some of these statements regrouped? And most importantly, how can I verify those overarching claims that I'm realizing that more than one people are making? And so that's the time that takes the most, that's the step that takes the most time in a reporting process, is identifying and requesting and gathering the public records, or sometimes the confidential records that can confirm or infirm or verify the claims that people have made in interviews. That's a months-long process, almost systematically. Under the California Public Records Act requests, agencies have 10 days to respond to a request, but they can then prolong that waiting time. And sometimes they do so indefinitely. And the only recourse is to file a public records lawsuit, which we actually did last year with Open Vallejo. We filed a public records lawsuit against the city of Vallejo to gain access to records that are public under California law that we knew that the city was not releasing to us, which we knew that they should. And so that process is, fighting for records is just a huge part of our work. Writing public records requests, keeping a log of all of these requests, following up after 10 days and then 14 days and then again 14 days. And just, it's a never-ending process. And as you do that and you start receiving records, you need to analyze them. You need to read every page, and every page. You cannot miss a page because maybe the critical information was at the bottom of that page. And for that specific story about Vallejo's improper police killing investigations, we actually built a whole database, sprawling spreadsheets, a set of several spreadsheets. And what we tried to do here is to build quantitative data out of qualitative data. So what we had really was reports, sourcing, people telling us things, a lot of public records. And these are words, but we had to translate these words into usable statistics. And to do that, we really had to gather all of the records to make authoritative statements. And we had to fact check these findings. And so once you have that database, you're not done. You need to make sure that every single data entry is double checked and triple checked. And only after that, really, the bulk of the writing happens. So throughout that process, obviously, you're writing a little bit on the side. You're also testing your story, so reporting against yourself. You need to, figure out what's the measuring stick here. Is it that people are not following a set of laws? Is it that they're not following a set of policies? Or is it that there's just no policy where there should be one? You need to figure out, is this really an outlier? Is Vallejo an outlier, or is this happening all over the country? And once you've done that, your story's bulletproof. You've reached out to your experts. Your experts say this is an outlier. You've written your story. Then the painstaking, if I may say, process of fact checking each and every word of your story begins. That, as well as really thinking about, how is this story going to be presented? How do we want readers to, receive this material? So, for example, for that story with Open Vallejo, we opted to have a short video that opened up the article where you could see some officers, basically what is the inception of what ended up being a police killing. You can't see the shooting itself, as you open up the page, but you understand kind of, right, we have it right here. We understand kind of what happens in the seconds prior to someone being, shot by police in this case. We also we wanted to represent the men whose stories we were trying to, recount here. So here, what we didn't want to do is use old pixelated photos from, the year 2007 that someone had on their cell phone. We wanted to represent people as their families remembered them. We wanted that to be atraumatic. So we sought consent from all of the families. We did not want them to be surprised, by seeing the photo of their loved ones. We wanted them to see that as a truthful representation of who they were when they were alive. And so these are conscious decisions that, again, take some time. You want to have consent from the families. You want to find the right artist, who can make depictions that we found, would be respectful. And then once all of that's done, you have a full story. It needs to go through the lawyers. And we're really lucky. We're working with ProJorn. They're pro bono lawyers. They're the best lawyers I've personally ever worked with. And they help us, making sure every little potential legal issues won't be a problem publishing. And once all that is done, we're ready to publish. But unfortunately and fortunately, then you're not done, because you need to find time and the resources to work on all of the stories that you had to push aside during that reporting. So often, I write a story and my editors tell me, actually, we think this is 3 stories. And so we're going to have to divide this. And so right now we're in the process of picking up on all of this material that we had to set aside, for this one story. And so it's a long, fascinating process that not a lot of people really get to peek into the daily life of what we do.
And there is a question about, if a community admires what you do and wants a similar organization in their area, what do you suggest they do? Be thinking about that. You don't have to answer that now. I think that'd be a good question to think about for the end. There was another question from Wendy, who lives in Vallejo. She's lived there since 2000. She monitors local social media posts, and she's always looking for information over emotion. She said, I believe the lack of reliable, timely data about local crime discredits Vallejo Police Department's position. How can we know what is true data when VPD social media stats are so far different from what their website reports? So how do you know? And I know you work with this data all the time, as we could hear from Laurent's description.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question to answer because even, sometimes I look at the data that the police department puts out and I'm confused because it doesn't match up with what I have in my records. So the really annoying answer here is that often as a community member, you can't unless you do some legwork on your own. If you decide you want to request the database from the California Department of Justice, for example, holds some of those records as well, and you're able to compare. I would say right now in Vallejo, from what I know, your best bet is to take a look at the Open Vallejo website and our critical incident database, or write to us. If you're trying to confirm, any data point, we'll want to help you. Jeff, do you have anything to add? Maybe there's something that I'm not thinking about here.
There is an example I'd like to give, which is the first portrait that opened Laurence's story was of Ronnell Foster, who was a 33-year-old father of 2 young children. He did not have a weapon. He was riding his bike without a bike light in Vallejo's downtown, which is pretty sleepy at night. And an officer named Ryan McMahon told him to stop. He briefly did, but then started pedaling away. And McMahon chased him, tased him, beat him in the head with a large metal flashlight, or allegedly in the head. It appears to be the case. And then fired 7.45 caliber rounds at his back and side as he scrambled to get away. He never fought back. Hit him in the back of the head, and the back and the side. And for a couple of years, or at least well over a year, and despite a bunch of requests for comment, the Vallejo Police Department, in this critical incident and use of force Tableau dashboard that they paid almost $100,000 for, did not have that use of force, that killing, in their database. And we asked the department about it. We reported that. And I think they recently put out a database that is sort of like ours, but has what we feel is a lot of extraneous information, and it's missing some really important information. He is in that one, but Ronnell was not represented in that for well over a year, despite us pointing it out. I mean, that is really challenging. It's really frustrating. And I'd also add that even if you try to get this information or other information like council members' voting records, which we're having to apply for grants to try to apply machine learning to old city council minutes just to figure that out. But it's just not there, or it's not available. And so we often learn things from sources. Our most recent article talks about a shooting in which a 10-year-old was caught in the crossfire. And that was, not made public. There's no press release about that from the department. It was just something that we learned through confidential sourcing.
Well, there's more questions, and I'll monitor, and I have questions in there because I'm going to go back and forth. So I'm going to go back to one of my questions, and then I'll look through the Q&A for others. It's great that people are really interested in this work. I think you do really, really good work. I just would recommend to anyone who hasn't been to Open Vallejo's website to go through and really look at some of those reports. And we talk about the care in which you, present them and construct them. And there's a section on the site about impact of the stories you produce. For example, you were the first to reveal that the city had paid over $10 million in the civil rights settlements and judgments since 2003, after filing a public record request that had been rejected. Your reporting forced the city to disclose body camera footage of 6 police officers killing a 20-year-old Willie McCoy. And we've talked about that personally, that work that you've done with that shooting. You filed a Brown Act complaint over a city manager's soliloquy and at a city council meeting, which led to immediate change in council procedures, right? So it's not just the reporting, right, but even the process that you're going through in terms of filing public records requests and filing complaints. How did the two of you define impact when it comes to your work? And what, I'm curious, what one story are you personally proud of because of the impact it made?
As I said before, I didn't start Open Vallejo to start a newsroom. I started it to try to support social change just through journalism. I like to say that if I thought long and hard about this. I used to be an advocate. I used to be a practicing litigator. And had, watercolor been a more effective strategy, Aikido, cross stitch, anything, that is what I'd be learning right now. I mean, Laurence went to journalism school as a master's degree, but this is all fairly new to me. But what I realized was that having, from talking to people and being here, that having just empirically verifiable reality was the most kind of radical and powerful thing we could do. And so in terms of impact, we've been very fortunate to see this pay off beyond our wildest dreams. I mean, we have seen the early separation from the city of the former police chief when we uncovered that he was going to retire and then come back basically the next day as interim chief to then presumably help pick his successor, and also would be getting both CalPERS retirement and being paid by the city. So he would have been bringing home about $40,000 a month to do the same job he had been doing the day before. The former city attorney retired 5 years early after we revealed a letter exchange where she had sent a letter to all of the judges of the Superior Court about illegal dumping and asking them to be in partnership with the city. Didn't include the public defender, and her office was prosecuting 6 cases, criminal cases against people at the time, and got a rebuke basically from the presiding judge. My favorite that I would like to show is, or one of my favorites, is this picture. We got a tip after we did. I saw there's a question about development. We did a series of stories about development on the former naval base at Mare Island, where the city manager had these undisclosed meetings, and then all of a sudden with the developers, and then all of a sudden the city started essentially changing its negotiating position in a way that did not benefit the city. We got a tip. We're about to go walk the dog on Mare Island and got a tip that there was a U-Haul being loaded up in front of his house, in front of the city manager's house. And it was in fact him. So we went over there first, and I had a proper camera in the trunk and didn't even have time, but I snapped this picture of him driving away without giving much notice, publicly anyway, from the city. So it's been pretty easy to define impact so far. But we'll see if that continues. And then in terms of stories, I think our story revealing that the police department is bending badges. So they have 7-point star-shaped badges, and for each person that they would kill, there's a clique of them. There was this tradition of bending the tip of the badge for each person. So you can see how that might potentially incentivize, pulling the trigger too quickly, or just may appear to be a celebration. They were also having parties and, drinking and having barbecues around this. It was a long running tradition. And that was our first story that revealed. And that, it became a worldwide issue, shared worldwide, as reported on worldwide. It got us a lot of credibility very quickly because it was this incredible thing. And it was initially denied by the city, but then within a couple of days, they launched a third-party investigation that is itself very flawed. And a lot of officers have left the department who were allegedly involved in this. It's coming up now in criminal cases. It's sort of like a tsunami, like it's finally reaching the courthouses, both federal and state, as well as civil rights cases. And, civil rights cases are looking at what's called Monell liability for municipal liability and potentially even a federal takeover, arguing that there is a policy of ratification of unnecessary killings. And so we're waiting to see what happens. I'd also point out the other one, because there's another story, which was about Vallejo City Council member Hakeem Brown's history of arrests and several convictions for really horrifying domestic violence. He did over 4 years in state prison in one case, never disclosed it. He was endorsed by the Vallejo Police Union, and he was probably going to become the mayor. I had pitched this to a number of traditional news outlets. I could not get anybody to take me seriously or it seriously. I gave reporters, hundreds of pages of public records, or offered them. Nobody wanted to write it. I didn't want to write it. And it was at that point, I don't even know that when I first started learning about it, I wasn't even sure I was starting a newsroom. But reported it out. And what's interesting about that one was it's basically most of the visits were local. It wasn't this kind of story that got shared really broadly geographically. It was, a very, very big chunk of Vallejo residents saw it and shared it. There were protests. There were calls, obviously, for him to step down. He hadn't disclosed any of this. He threatened to sue us, but again, thanks to the amazing lawyers we have, we knew that we were fine. And I want to say, because people are like, oh, it was great timing because it came out pretty close to the election. That was entirely unintentional. It just took that long. I was editing out typos until the very second I posted this huge investigation. But he lost the mayor's race and is not running again.
So we have, Laurence, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that. There are some. I have questions, but the audience has questions. So and there's some good ones. So just one quickly, actually two, and then I'll go back to maybe my questions. So one is about data and about Vallejo PD crime stats being cross-referenced to Bureau of Justice statistics and or Federal Bureau of Investigation, UCR reporting. So they're asking, is there too much lag time between the federal reporting to be of any use to you, or is that an option to kind of cross-reference when it comes to some of these gaps in reporting on data?
It's an option to cross-reference I know that the year 2020 is already out. The FBI UCR database that this person was referring to, good knowledge of your federal law enforcement data, and so there is some of that data that can be cross-referenced. Often it's a number of use of force. Some types of use of force are also displayed in those databases, but indeed there is a lag time that is several months long, and often you don't have the specific data that you're looking for. I've had more luck, honestly, with state Department of Justice data. California has been requiring pretty stringent data reporting since 2012, actually before the federal government did. And so I've had some luck finding some data in the Department of Justice, in the State Department of Justice databases that actually didn't correspond to data that came from the city of Vallejo. And that's where you really get some interesting, things to look at. Why don't these two databases correspond to one another? Where's that extra information I'm getting from the State Department of Justice? Where did it go in the data that was put out by the city of Vallejo? And so it was a really good question. The answer is yes, you can cross-reference some of those statistics. You can also get extra data from the State Department of Justice that can be useful as well.
Great. Second question, you mentioned Mare Island. I think there's a question, Jeff, about how does Open Vallejo decide on the balance between coverage of the general social economic issues and the police and government issues?
Well, yeah, no, it's an excellent question. When we have more resources, we are going to like the school district, for example, we want to look at it very closely. As I mentioned, we have reported on Mare Island development. You're looking at our entire newsroom right now, the two of us editorially, plus an amazing volunteer. We want to, it's a constant challenge to prioritize. We tend to stay on topics that for an extended period of time, because we've found that, the second we publish something, or even as we're working on something, we're learning so much more than we did. I will definitely say that any story that we initially think is a small story that we can turn around quickly, that's almost never the case, because we just learn more and more and more. And in a place like Vallejo, the reality is so strange and so extreme. This really isn't a democracy. And it hasn't had coverage for basically its entire existence of this kind. And so we just end up uncovering more and more and more. So it's definitely a challenge. But we basically, the short answer is we go where the facts lead us. If we find out that, for example, we did a story on these alleged whistleblowers in the Mare Island development incident. They were alleging that they were being retaliated against and having threatening behavior directed at them. Police cars sitting outside their house. Then we followed up on that. So we actually have a number of stories across I have to be kind of vague here, but across a large swath of the city and county agencies coming up that we're really excited about. And I think that you'll see a little more diversity in the coverage in addition to the police. But the police generate a great deal of information for us to report out.
Along those lines, can we, Lawrence, did you want to say something?
Just one sentence. That too is one of the reasons I think why we have a large amount of police coverage is because often public safety is immediately threatened in ways that some, shady political deals or, things that are definitely in the public interest that the people of Vallejo deserve to know and should know, and that we want to put out for them. Sometimes we have to kind of prioritize what is the biggest threat to public safety. And sometimes it's just both decisions are really hard to make, but where is the power mostly concentrated? Where's the power being abused the most? And where are people suffering the most from it? And so I think that that's part of the reason why Open Vallejo started as concentrating on police primarily. And so we're hoping to diversify, and we want to diversify, the public health system, treatment of the mentally ill in Vallejo, the treatment of unsheltered people are also topics that we want to look at in addition to all the ones that Jeff mentioned. So just my little grain of salt.
No, that's guiding me into the next question about the future. What does the future hold for Open Vallejo? It's like you're doing this with two people, two very committed people. But it is a two-person newsroom right now. You're doing such impactful, important work. But what do you when you're thinking about the future of Open Vallejo, what's the future hold?
Well, we have so many stories at different stages of production right now. I'm evidently really excited about all of them. I'm really proud of all of these stories that are coming up as well. We have major reports coming in about use of force cover-ups, about conflicts of interest in criminal probes. We have a story coming about what a source called a purgatory at the county jail. We have pretty big revelations about the city attorney's office too that are soon going to come out of our newsroom. So I would say the future is pretty bright. We have a lot of work on our hands, but we're really excited about it. And I would just tell people to read our stories, share stories, and keep up with us.
Yeah, I too am excited about these. I mean, they're unfortunately really bleak stories. All of our stories tend to be, but they're important for people to know about. And so when we say we're excited, we're not minimizing the harm, but we're excited to be able to be in the privileged position of revealing these things to the public so that people have the information they need for democratic self-governance. In addition, and I saw a question from Neil Chase, who's a great person to ask this question, and it's a very good question. How can we help, or how can other projects spring up like this in other cities? So Open Vallejo is actually the first project, as you mentioned, Paulette, of the Informed California Foundation. And the idea is to basically take a public health model and to try to support and inspire and help people to form very similar or slightly different kinds of organizations in their own cities and towns and counties. And so it's a little different from Open Vallejo. Open Vallejo is a dedicated permanent newsroom, but it's also a laboratory. So the things that work, we want to try to help universalize those and share them, sort of an open source model. Things that don't work are missteps. We want to learn from those too. And ultimately create, trainings, toolkits, also do statewide but local reporting in partnership oftentimes with other news organizations, other transparency organizations, and just try to support the ecosystem. There are a ton of really great organizations out there, but we're sort of, what we're looking for are the places where they're not overlapping, or they're not connecting in a specific place, or whether that's geographic or sort of metaphysical, and to try to use and leverage our resources and our relationships to get the right kind of transparency and journalism interventions to the places and the people that need it at the time they need them. And so that's the idea behind Informed California Foundation, which we're, really going to be working to grow over the next year and years.
And you're easily reachable on the Open Vallejo website.
Yes.
So I think that's it would be an interesting conversation. I did see that from Neil Chase, and I think maybe a good conversation to have with him offline too. We're almost at the end. We have just 2 minutes left, and I just wanted to close out with a question about how people can support this work. You are a nonprofit newsroom, as we mentioned. I know you accept donations. You have grants. You do sponsorships. Full disclosure, I am an Open Vallejo donor, proud Open Vallejo donor, being proud of the work you're doing and proud to support it. How can this audience, anyone who's listening to us today, support your work?
Thank you for that. We are tiny, we're small but mighty. And we want to be able to continue this work into the future. We want to increase our capacity, including by hiring more reporters, more editors in particular, the editorial side of things. We very much want to increase this work in its intensity. The best way to do that is a tax-deductible gift, if folks are able, or to encourage others to do so. We are coming into Newsmatch starting November 1st through December 31st, which is a matching campaign that a lot of nonprofit newsrooms participate in. We're looking for people who would be willing to be local match partners with us to help, increase the power of the donations we get. Much of our funding comes directly from the community. It's small donations. That is what sustains us. We have, I think our average donation is probably $34, I think, right now. I think it has been for a while, actually. And so that is, kind of the most direct way. And again, it's tax deductible. We are looking for and hoping to speak with, people who can be major donors and foundations. Our work is really resource intensive. And then the other thing is just to follow our work. We understand that, this is a working class community. Not everybody can contribute financially, but spread the word, read our stories, share our stories, sign up for a newsletter. Those are all really great steps and we appreciate every single one. We notice every time.
And when is Newsmatch again? Just so, what is the period of time for donors?
It starts November 1st and it goes through the end of the year.
Okay, and those donations will be matched through this. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So, it's been great talking with both of you, learning more about the work at Open Vallejo. You're doing such important and impactful work. And I just want to thank everyone who listened today and spent the hour with us. And I also want to thank the JSK staff who helped us organize this session. I'm looking forward to more conversations in the future. And everyone just have a great day. Thank you very much.